Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am joined today by an absolute legend in our industry. This is such an honor. We go way back. Will Barron, thank you for coming on the show.
I'm humbled and appreciative that you have me on. Genuinely, really appreciate it.
I've learned so much from you over the years. I initially found out about you at the Sales Hacker Conference, and not to age myself too much, but this is going back, it must be 5, 6 years ago. And you actually had an open booth on the floor of the Sales Hacker Conference, and you were interviewing people live, and it was terrific. Do you remember that?
I remember that, the travel, and then doing 15, 20 podcast episodes and having to edit them for 3 weeks after the fact. I think, I can't remember, which event was it? Because there was a bunch of them that we went to. What was the location?
Yeah. It was in San Francisco. I think it was maybe the Revenue Summit or something like that. But it was, it was in SF.
Yeah, so I did a lot of the editing for those shows. I promptly hired a video and podcast editor straight after that kind of live event.
It's been amazing, and you've been so ahead of your time. You're like 5 years ahead of where this industry has gone. In that you had this really nice studio and great equipment, and really bringing a high level of production to your content. I've just learned a ton from your podcast, your webinars, and everything that you've been doing. If folks aren't familiar with you, and there's like probably 2 people in our world who don't know what you do. Tell us, how did you get into this, and what have you been working on?
So I got into this. So I was in medical device sales. I was a middling performer in what is a relatively elite space in medical device sales. It's very difficult to break in. So average performer in a high performing sales team and environment. And I know this sounds like some kind of intro to a webinar or get rich quick scheme marketing kind of funnel, but I literally came home one day, Googled, I really vividly remember writing it, how to get better at sales. And everything that came back at me was men and women in awkwardly fitting suits from the 80s and 90s telling me to use tricks and weirdness and manipulation tactics. And I knew that if I went into the operating room and said any of this to a surgeon, they'd tell me I'll be careful with my language, but to get stuffed, and you'd never be allowed back in that account again. And you just lost a potential 1, 2 million, £3 million account, as you kind of get in there and do deals over the course of a couple of years. So at that point, I knew I had to do something different than what was the traditional sales process at the time. So I started the podcast. I interviewed people like yourself, obviously, and then I started interviewing other high performers from other spaces, astronauts, UFC fighters, special forces, Formula One drivers, NASCAR drivers, people like this. And the goal was to try and uncover what high performers in general did, and then translate that to the sales process. And a lot of it is discipline. A lot of it is doing the fundamentals day in, day out. There's not a lot of rocket science and novelty that really, when you got down to the basics of it, high performing SDRs, salespeople, VPs of sales, and go-to-market teams, there wasn't a lot that the highest performers in the spaces were doing that wasn't the fundamentals, right message, right person, right time, that kind of thing. And so that was the podcast. That's how it evolved. Eventually, people started to ask me for training. So I humbly offered a bit of training. And then in the meantime, since we last hung out, I've written a couple of books, and just trying to give everything away for free. Just all the content's away for free. And I charge people essentially for working with me for implementation.
Got it. And so you came at this, you were trying to solve your own problem, really, because when you started to Google, how do I do this? You would get these outdated techniques, and it just didn't resonate with you. And so when you set out to find out about this, how did you find the people that were actually doing this and get them to come on your podcast and interview them?
Well, this is a problem. And you might have, because your podcast's been around for a while as well. I started my podcast about 9.5 years ago. At Christmas, it'll be kind of the 10-year anniversary of it. And I
Oh, yeah.
would reach out to experts. So I'd read a book, or I would get an introduction via, just selling them, using referrals, that side of things. And no one knew what a podcast was. I had to
Yeah.
pitch a podcast as a radio interview done online that at first a few hundred people would listen to, which is not a very good, a strong sales pitch to someone who's just wrote a book that, 50,000 people bought it in the first week. So that's
Okay.
how it started. Obviously, then when you get the social proof and the numbers improve and you're hundreds of thousands of downloads a month, it gets a little bit easier, and people start to pitch you to come on. But at first, it was difficult, and it became more and more difficult over time to really differentiate those individuals who had a lot to say, and then those who either had practical knowledge of implementing the sales process, or people who'd done a lot of research. My background's I've got a degree in chemistry. I'm a published scientist. Terrible chemist. Shouldn't have been published. That's kind of a story for another time. But I've got a background in science. I love using the scientific method. All my training and everything that I do is based on the back of that. So they're the two kind of groups of people that I searched for. People who are in the field doing the damn thing and getting it done. How can we use, even if they are unconsciously competent in what they are doing day to day, how can we put that into frameworks, systematize it so people can use it? And then the people using, whether they are in the field or not, people using the scientific method to test, to uncover new strategies, to build go-to-market strategies that perhaps are interesting and novel, but are empirically proven to work. They're the two groups of people that I hunted out.
Okay. And so what you're hoping is that there's a salesperson out there, or there's somebody who's struggling, and they start Googling this, they find your podcast, and then they can listen to some of the episodes and get some tools and techniques that they can go and use. So you're trying to gather that information for them. And then, so at the same time, there's a lot of sales people, or they're good at sales as far as marketing themselves, but they don't really have anything interesting to say or useful. Did you ever find that there's some content that you just couldn't use because the person was all fluff? And we don't have to name any names, but it was fluff. I just, right?
I literally stopped doing interviews 2 years ago on my podcast. It's now a solo episode because I was finding it very difficult to differentiate people who had something to say, because I don't care about the audience size. It's not like the podcast was and is its own beast. I don't need to hijack someone else's social media kind of following. So that was never really an issue for me. But at this point in time, at the beginning, yes, of course, I'm trying to grow on the back of other creators. But I find it very difficult to uncover people who had something interesting to say, who then could prove that what they said was effective. There's an infamous episode I did with Jordan Belfort. It's never been aired. At the time, he was one of the biggest guests I had on the show, and we didn't get on. We didn't see eye to eye in a lot of the sales process, and it became a bit of a mess. So there's loads of episodes where politely wrap it up and then communicate later on that it's just not a good fit, and it's not a good for the both of us. It's not a good look for them, and it's not a good fit for my audience as well. So yeah, loads of episodes. Even though I thought I'd done my due diligence to find the right people, they was still just terrible podcast episodes.
That's a really, really tricky, because you have to sort of find a needle in a haystack. There's not that many people out in the world that are really great at sales, and they have the ability to communicate that and give you some tools and techniques that you can actually share with your audience. I would think that there's a lot more, we call them like charlatans, where you just know as soon as they start going, if you pop a hole in it, there's nothing there. Is that you did actually find that?
Yeah, and when I was doing more interviews, the podcast was kind of known for me asking difficult questions and hoping, or giving the person the opportunity to prove their worth on the back of that. So there was loads of interviews where the first 40 minutes are useful, and then the last 5-10 minutes, I kind of bring it back down to earth as to what people can expect from implementing a process, technique, a tool, software, whatever it is. So I want the truth, the best that we can find it. I'm not some kind of arbiter of truth. I can only do my best to uncover it. But yeah, if I smell something fishy, I'll ask a few questions, and then it's up to the audience to decide, right? Do they want to whether it's time, money, just intellectual kind of effort to try this, or have they been sold that that might not be the best pathway forward? So
Yeah.
I leave that to the audience then.
It's tricky. You're still a scientist at heart, I can tell, because you're it's like, what is the truth, really? And it's also very contextual, right? Because one sales process might work great for one industry or one person, depending on so many different factors, but it might not work at all for somebody else. And so it's hard. And just ironically, I saw an interview once where Jordan Belfort was interviewing Grant Cardone, and it was, you got to see this, folks. If you've never seen this, it's one of the most interesting psychological dramas I've ever seen, because for a variety of reasons, but the roles were reversed in that case. So Jordan Belfort was you, Grant Cardone. Have you ever interviewed Grant Cardone?
I haven't. Every now and again, I'll drop him an email, and he emails me back with a bit of business advice. I've never asked him to be on the podcast. People have strong thoughts and opinions about it, but if you take away some, and he's teaching car salespeople how to sell. Typically, it's completely different to a complex B2B sales. It's not the same process, and you can't tie the two kind of trainings together. But he's always given me good advice. So he's responded to my emails promptly. And you can't doubt whether you like him and how he goes about doing business or not. You can't doubt his success, right? So it's one of those.
It's really interesting. It's almost like you need to be a curator of information and contextualize it for people, because there might be somebody who gets a ton of value from Jordan Belfort and Grant Cardone, and then the next person down the line, just doesn't connect, and they're more of a now I can't remember his name, Brett Admonson, the guy from the Jolt Effect. I think that's his name. Maybe that's more of a fit for the type of person that's seeking the information. They need the research and they need the data points to be able to contextualize it and use it. So it really just depends on, it depends on so many factors when you come in. When you do your training with people, how do you go about level setting where they are and what they particularly need from you, so that it's not just sort of a generic program?
So a couple of things. First thing, when you come into our training program, there's a bunch of one-on-one. So it isn't some online course where go and help yourself and hopefully it fits. I would love that to work, because it would save me a whole bunch of time. I could reduce the price of the training program, and I'd probably do a lot more revenue on the back of it. But I found that 12-month program, quarterly one-on-one calls, group coaching calls during the week, and then almost unlimited amount of training content that we curate for each person who gets signed up. That's the formula that leads to the biggest leaps forward in performance. But to uncover what people need, sometimes, sometimes you've got to pitch people what they want and then give them what they need in the coaching and that side of things. Mm-hmm. So someone might come to me and say, I need help prospecting. My market is terrible. So then we'll go, okay, well, is there anyone else in your team having success booking meetings? Oh yeah, well, this person. Okay, well, what are they doing different to me? Oh, well, what are they doing different to you? Sorry. And we reverse engineer success from that first standpoint, because we don't want to build a sales process out of nothing. Now, if there's no one on their team who's having success, the whole team's drowning, then it might not be a them problem. It might be a product market fit problem. There might be a competitor problem. There might be something else that we need to take a deeper look into. Because we want to be in the analogy is the metaphor is the fastest car, right? If you're driving a Ferrari and you're decent at sales, and I'm incredible at sales, but I'm driving a Reliant Robin. As I said that might not translate. A British freewheeler, tiny car from the 60s. Yeah, you're never going to win. So there's multiple variables, but typically it's all of the people in your team having success. Yes, then you absolutely can as well. Okay, what are you doing differently to them? What are they doing differently to you? Then do you have the fundamentals in place? Do you know how many deals you need to close, which is crazy, so many people don't know this. Do you know how many deals you need to close this year to hit quota? How many people do you need to, how many accounts do you need to have in your pipeline to be able to hit those numbers? How much outreach do you need to do to book those meetings? What does the sales process look like? breaking it all down step by step. It's boring, it's tedious, no one wants to do it. But once you've got it nailed, you've got a bit more of a plan then. And at that point, we can start looking at, okay, and this is where we get practical. What is the bottleneck? What's the one thing that if we can change it, improve it, or eliminate it, makes everything else easier or more succinct? That's the key teaching point at that point, usually, that once we identify that. And it could be we're just using LinkedIn. Okay, great. Maybe your buyers don't care about LinkedIn. They're not on the platform. For doing outreach, we need to call them, we need to email them, we need to meet them in person, we need to go to events, whatever it is. That then is the moment where results kind of like skyrocket. And then there's always the next sticking point, and then there's the next one, and it never ends because no one's ever satisfied, right?
It's never ending. And you see folks out there operating even without the map. They're just sort of bumbling around without a plan, on going from day to day without knowing what the choke points are in their process.
I see that all the time. And
Wow.
until you realize that that's a problem, I'm not sure that it's your fault as an individual contributor to salesperson. That is it's a go-to-market problem. That is a sales strategy problem that should be passed down from leadership. It should be built as a team. At least the fundamentals. Sure, we all have our own nuances, and I might say things one way to be congruent. You might communicate a slightly different way to be congruent. So I'm not saying we need a script that we rigidly stick to. If you sell a complex product to sophisticated individuals, executives, people with decent sized budgets, you can't use a script. You'll just look like an idiot, and they won't accept it. But if until hopefully to this episode, you're having a bit of a light bulb moment of, oh, I'm just flying by the seats of my pants, plodding along day by day.
Yeah.
Until that point, it's someone else's fault. As soon as you realize it, then you've got to take personal accountability as a salesperson or as a sales leader to pass this down. At that point, then you've got to take action. It becomes your problem to solve.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes do you try everything and then you realize that they never had product market fit in the beginning of the process. So it's not necessarily a go-to-market problem. It's a product market fit problem. Do you ever see that happen when you're training?
So about half the people in the program are startup founders. So they're doing founder-led sales to then we'll coach them on documenting everything, building the process out, and then hiring that first one or two salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the coaching is slightly different, right? If we're dealing with an individual salesperson, if your company doesn't have product market fit, you are on the front line. You can give feedback. You can give engineering the what the market wants. And if you do that for 12 months and nothing changes, you need to be in a different vehicle. You need to get in the Porsche. You need to get in the Ferrari. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels. You're wasting a lot of time, and you're not going to make you're not going to make decent money. And I don't know your opinion on this, David. Salespeople should only be in a sales role to make an ungodly amount of money as quick as possible, and then semi-retire, do a career that they actually care about, whatever it is. Very few people are born to be in sales for 20, 40 years as a career. So we can perhaps touch on that in a second. But if that's for individual contributors, if they are not in that role and it's been 12 months, they've given the feedback and nothing's changed, they should just they should look for a different role because you want to be in a position where you can win. Now, if you're helping a founder, then the game's slightly different, right? I'm a founder, you're a founder. Then we start looking at value proposition. We start looking at breaking that down. It would shock you, and maybe it won't shock you. It shocks me every time how few people can communicate a value proposition in one sentence of the organization or a specific product of we help this person solve this problem in this specific way. Hopefully it's interesting or novel, the way that they solve the problem. So few people can deal with that. So that's one of the first things that we work with founders of, especially if it's a technical founder or, heaven forbid a technical SaaS founder who there's obviously a stereotype there of uber nerd kind of thing, which I'm a nerd as well, which is awesome. But getting them to wrap their head around the communication piece then, helps them understand whether they have product market fit. So yeah, that's a kind of separate process on its own. And it's something that's kind of anecdotally we've had some success with.
Okay. And so my assumption is that they got into technical software because they didn't want to talk to anybody,
Yeah,
and
of course.
they're not a salesperson at heart. So do you find that they want to document the process, get the value prop, and then go hire a salesperson? And sub question, I'm curious about what you said about salespeople, but do you find sometimes you just realize, buddy, you should not be in sales. Like you should be doing something else.
So, two questions, right? The
Yeah.
first one, I like it. It depends. If you've just had 50 million in funding, then you should be hiring a VP of sales to do the hiring. The number's going to vary. If you are kind of seed funding or pre-seed, then there is absolutely tremendous value in the founder learning how sales works, going through the process and implementing it. If they can have success and they are a massively introverted sales nerd, tech nerd, then almost anyone else who, and we can talk about the traits of high performing salespeople in a second if you like, almost anyone who has more of those traits will be able to pick up their process and absolutely run with it. So there's tremendous value in them getting over and some of it is they see sales as slimy, they see sales as not important. They've been sold on the idea of product-led kind of marketing and product-led development, which is great when you've got a fantastic product. It's not ideal when you're building that product and you don't know what people want. So founder-led sales, unless again you've had tons of funding, in which case you're out of my kind of realm of expertise at that point. There are other people that can better serve you, perhaps. But people with seed funding, people doing founder-led sales, bootstrapped companies, absolutely founder-led sales. As for the second question of should some salespeople just not be in sales, we've got a assessment on the website. It's called the Sales Code Assessment. It's completely free. I keep saying 20,000 people have been through it, but like 3 years ago, 20,000 people have been through it. So I need to double check that number. But there's now enough data, and we've reverse engineered 18 traits of high performing individuals. Each of the traits, and it's being able to turn on extrovertedness. So I'm an introvert. I can turn on extrovertedness to chat to someone like yourself, and hopefully not come across as shy, and there's hopefully somewhat of a level of charisma there. And debatable for the audience to kind of give you feedback on. But things like being more optimistic, being comfortable talking about money, the ability to set habits, not being a people pleaser, which is somewhat counterintuitive, and be able to influence. These are all traits that absolutely anyone can learn. There is no, as long as you've got as long as you're open to the fact that humans are malleable, and you're willing to put some effort in, and probably have a little bit of pain in the first few instances. If you're completely introverted and you hate talking to people on the phone, for example, if you're willing to go through a little bit of pain, you can absolutely get over that and turn on a level of extrovertedness. So out of the 18 traits of high performers that we reversed engineered from, we tested 150, just see what stuck. We tied the traits of the traits to whether people were above quota, below quota, the deal sizes that they were doing, that side of things. It's all statistically significant at this point, all the data. And there's nothing on there where like you've got to be 6'3", which unfortunately, if you're born a shorter man or lady, you're knackered. There's nothing that can't be learnt. So then it comes down to fundamentally answer your question: is the person willing to put in the effort and the hustle to make those changes? Yes or no. If they're not willing to put in the effort, then they should choose a different career. If yes, then let's go. Let's get the training in, and let's improve those skills.
If you are willing to put in the work, and is that data available? Is that in your book, or is that a report that they can get? That sounds really interesting.
So there are two books.
Okay.
There are two books. The first book is the sales process. It's called Sell Made Simple. It's all available on the website for free, salesman.com. That's the sales process. That's 15 frameworks of how to find and close deals. So it goes for everything from building your value proposition to cold outreach to building a cadence to I call it a diagnosis call, but your discovery process, demos, closing, referrals. It goes through the whole thing. The second book is called the Sales Code. The Sales Code is how to implement these 18 traits of high performance. Essentially, how to become the person who is capable of hitting the quota. Because there's no point in just knowing all the steps of the process and all the theory if you're not going to pick up the phone, or if you do the process for 3 days and then you procrastinate and don't get anything done after the fact. So they're the two kind of stepping stones to high performance and success that we teach in our training. But again, you don't need me for the training. Just get on the website, get the books. They're all free.
That's amazing. So we can get these books on the website today, and that's what I was going to ask you. If you're a newer salesperson or an older one, and you need to learn these things, but you don't have any money or your company's not going to support you right now. You've done hundreds of podcasts, hundreds of webinars. Is there some way, how do we get started with learning some of the key points that you've collected over the years?
Very literally the books. So I can answer your question more nuanced if there's something specific you want me to kind of build out the steps of how to win that element of the sales process. But fundamentally, everything is in the books. There's and they're updated all the time. I just added a new chapter on building business cases because that was something that is coming up more and more often in our training in the group coaching. That more and more what would be a handshake deal or a conversation with procurement has now become we need a formal business case to get other influencers within the account on board with. So we've just done a workshop and then in the book a step-by-step framework to build a business case. So absolutely everything that I don't know everything. I like to think I know a little bit. Again, it's for the market to decide, but whether I'm talking nonsense or not. But the book gives you, both books give you again everything step by step framework wise, in a step by step framework to implement, and that should get you a baseline level of success. If you run through the books and you're not finding and closing deals and you're getting close to or hitting quota, then something else is a kind of a miss there.
You might need some tough love at that point. So that's when they need to call you. But what an amazing opportunity. I mean, for all the folks, if you're listening this far into the podcast, go over to the website and avail yourselves of these resources because, and again, like I said, I've known Will for many, many years, and you've spoken to the top experts. You've done the work. You've put in a massive amount of research on this, and you've condensed them into these books, and they're free. I mean, come on, people. If free is too hard, then maybe you shouldn't be in sales. I think that's the point that you're making. It's not that you're born a salesperson, but you can become one with hard work and empathy. Will, I want to ask you, you made an interesting point. No matter how passionate you are for these topics and helping people with your content, even you got burnt out at some point with the interviews. What was it how did you feel with that, when it started to feel like, I just want to go solo for a while and then maybe come back to the interviews later?
It was the research phase. We've mentioned a couple of names. I won't mention any more names. You might have a few names in your head. I think you might do from how you framed a couple of these questions up.
Okay.
But 3 or 4 years ago, there's an influx of people who are growing followers on LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, they've got a big following. They must know something. Check out some of the content. So it was interesting. And I started having some of these folks on. And they were just terrible interviews, not useful or practical for anyone. So I was like, okay. Then I started reaching out to people who've been in the game for a while, and I could see, well, some of their content was starting to drop off, and it was becoming less useful. So then I had a kind of a bit of a soul search as to, do I want to just interview people, or do I want to start to collate all of this and give it away somehow? And that's where the book came from. So it was pressure from speaking to people who didn't know what they talking about, and then me knowing that, because I've done over 1,000 interviews on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
They're all it cost me, I know, it cost me a fortune to get them all transcribed. This is like 18 months before all the AI tools came online for like free transcriptions and stuff. So it cost me tens of thousands to get them all transcribed, and they're all documented. There's quotes from them all. There's quotes. I think there's a quote from you in one of the books as well. I'll send that over to you later on. So everything's quoted, everything's searchable, and I had this massive database of knowledge of people that I really respected. I was like, do I need to do more interviews right now? Sure. there is a new tool coming down the line. There is, Clay's just had a ton of funding, and that's a really awesome tool. That's kind of at the beginning of a new generation of doing business and booking meetings potentially. But fundamentally, does the individual sales contributor, which is my audience, right? I care about individual salespeople and founders, but mainly salespeople. Do they need to know about all this right now? No. What they need, I thought, and my best service to the market was put the interviews to one side for a second, because I was just getting bored of interviewing the same people, and the people that were different, again, a lot of non-sense. And then doubling down on the book. And I've obviously never written a book before, and that was a bit of a learning curve. And getting all that published, edited. There's one here. I'm not trying to picture the book, but you can see all the characters and the colors and the diagrams.
Oh, wow.
Absolute pig to put together. But that then became my focus. So kind of burnt out from the interviews, and then I'm a bit of a psychopath, so that energy had to go somewhere. So it went into the books then.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you're going from creating, and then at some point you need to give yourself some space to collate and curate and edit and just for your own soul, really, it seems like, to be able to go, what have I been doing over the last 10 years? And what is the body of work here?
So I can't remember what it's called, but it's a fancy book about art. But it's a book that tries to take some of the fanciness away from the word art. And I read it and I was like, what I'm doing, someone else's perspective might say it's art. If it wasn't a sales podcast and it was a podcast about philosophy, then you consider that more artful than boring sales, right? And I read that book and I was like, okay, well, there's the opportunity to create something here that is more impactful than another conversation. And that then got me over the hump of committing to the book. And I have to talk about the book, the process, and all that kind of stuff. And the characters, there's loads of illustrated characters, and we use them to story tell. And there's another book coming down the pipeline at some point in the future, which will just essentially be a buyer's journey kind of story illustrated, as opposed to text and diagrams and that sort of things, just to drill into people's brains and another angle of communicating how to help people move down the buyer's journey. Obviously, people learn in different ways. And as soon as I changed my mindset of, which is the difficult bit, right? I'm the podcaster to, my goal is to help salespeople. That opened up loads of doors and opportunities and different ways of doing things. And so, as I said towards the top of the show, the goal is to find the bottleneck. You can only do so many interviews. You can only get so many downloads for a sales podcast. Nobody's rushing home in the evening and putting on a sales podcast on the telly, sitting down there with the husband and wife with a beer and go, right, we're just going to watch Will for 45 minutes now, talk about, whatever it is, ICPs or, the total addressable market and uncovering data. It's not going to happen. So there's only so that was the bottleneck. So I had to do something different. And as I said, I'm a bit of a psychopath from a energy standpoint. I need to get stuff done. I need to create, do something. And the books were the next kind of funnel of my energy. And then we won't talk about it now. We talk about off air if you like. There's a few things coming down the line now that the books are done, even though they get iterated upon and improved over time. And there's a few kind of more projects that are not really sales related that my energy is kind of getting pushed towards at the moment.
Okay, so you piqued our interest now. Can you give us a high level overview, or should we set up another podcast interview?
It's top secret. I'll tell
Okay.
you. I'll tell you off air. But
Exciting.
I only talk about stuff when there is some traction, when it exists,
Yeah.
when. So I'm not stroking my ego before I've delivered something of value. Yeah, and obviously it's subjective as how much value comes from all the stuff that I've published over the years.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some value there. But I only talk about things and share things when something exists. So yeah,
Okay.
after maybe it's an opportunity for a podcast. We'll talk about it offline.
I'm ready to go when you are. Will, this is so great because, folks, you can get a distilled version of Will's incredible body of work here so much money, so much time, so much energy has gone into finding the tips and techniques and strategies that are in these books. You can go right now and get them, and then now, Will, hopefully you can get some new subscribers for your new ventures. You know that will stay in touch with you and make sure that they know what you're working on. So thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us this stuff to think about.
David, I appreciate you, mate. I appreciate everything you're doing for the sales space as well. And I'm super grateful for you having me on.
We'll see you next time.